Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and today we're going to be making the Hello pouches. They're pretty cute. So let me get you over to my machine and we'll get started sewing. So I've already gone and I've cut out all my pieces that I need. I cut out my 3 pieces for my pouch bottom, and I've already started on this one so that I can quickly show you the steps. But you'll put your 3 pieces together, your piece on the bottom, your foam piece in the middle, and your top, and then you'll go about marking your piece. And how I did it was I found my 45-degree line on my ruler, and I laid the 45-degree line across the bottom. Let me move this over just a little bit. So I laid that across the bottom. Oh, wait a minute. I got this going wrong. Just a second. I need to turn my ruler around. Now, how did I get that? Let me see. Yes, so I got my 45-degree line, and I have it going across the bottom of my piece. So I've just got it lined up with the bottom, and then I scooted it over until I got the corner the way that I wanted it. So I have my 45-degree going across the bottom right here, and then I just brought it up until I had the corner that I wanted, and I marked. And on this I used chalk just because it's such a dark color that it wouldn't pick up very well. And then once I got my first mark on there, then I went 1.5 inches from that mark, and I made my next mark, went another 1.5 inches, made my next mark, and I kept doing that across. And then I went in the opposite direction so that I have a crisscross going. Now I'm using a walking foot on this, and I'm using a denim needle. I've set my machine so that it's on woven heavy because it's going to be going through some thicker layers. And I've got my stitches on 2.0. Now if you don't have a walking foot, you can still do the project. You just want to go a little bit slower when you're sewing so that you don't get puckers as you go. If you go too fast, it's going to pucker up on you. And the other key thing is that when you go in one direction sewing, even with a walking foot, you want to go in one direction, and then you want to spin your item around, and you want to go in the opposite direction, spin it around, go in the opposite direction. So we're going to go ahead and we'll do our first line. And also the other thing that you want to pay attention to is that as you're putting this up under your foot, you want to make sure that you're not pushing your bottom piece down so that you end up sewing it so that it's flipped over, because it's not going to show up very well if that happens. So I'm just going to go, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this way, and then we'll flip it around, and I'm going to finish this off. Oops. And you can turn, if you have the capability of turning your machine down, go ahead and do that, or just don't push so hard on your foot pedal like I just did. So like I said, after I go through one line, I spin this. I gotta remember where my lines are. All right, there we go. So then you're going to spin it so that you're going the opposite way, because if you continue to go in the same direction every single time, you're going to create puckers. just got a couple more lines to go here. And each time I just kept spinning. And once I got a row done, once I got my lines going across this way, then I just started with my lines going the other direction. And it really helps if you mark your lines ahead of time so that you can visually see where your lines need to be. And I just went ahead and I did all my lines going this way, and then I did all my lines going that way. On the other one that I did, I used the Fusion ink pen that disappears with heat, and I did the same thing. I just made my crisscrosses. Let me move this camera just a little bit so that you can see a little better. So I just did the same thing, and once I was done, I just went over it with my iron so that my lines disappeared. With this being a lighter color, it was easier to do it that way. With this one being darker, I just used the chalk. So your next step, once you get your crisscrosses all done, you're going to take it and you're going to trim it down to the size for whichever size that you're making. So it really depends if you're making the small, medium, large, or the extra large pouch. So I have this one that is the small, and the other one that I was showing you is the medium size. And I just felt it was easier if I got some steps done ahead on the other one, so that as we get to different steps, I can show you and we can kind of get through the tutorial a little bit easier today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim this down to the size that I need for the small, and then we'll put some binding on. Okay, so I've already gone and I've trimmed this piece, and your next step, let me get my pieces together properly here. Yes, those are the two that I need. For that, I'm trying to find, oh, there's my piece of vinyl. I was like, what did I do with my piece of vinyl? Okay. So I've got that going. Now we're going to connect it. What we did was we have our binding pieces 2 inches, and then we took it to our ironing board and we folded it in half and pressed it all the way to the end. So now it's 1 inch. And we did the same with the other piece that's going to add on to it. Okay, so you have 2 pieces of binding for your vinyl. So make sure you don't grab the one that one of the ones that goes to the vinyl. Just check your vinyl and make sure you have your 2 pieces for your vinyl set aside. And we did the same thing for the pieces for the vinyl. We had cut them what we needed and then folded it in half and pressed that. And also the same with the 2 pieces that we'll be using towards the end when we make our box cuts for the bottom. So all of them we had measured out, and you just want to make sure that you pick the correct one that goes with this one here. And we're going to put them right side to right side on top of each other. So one's going to be going lengthwise this way, and this one's going to be going down. And you're going to lay them on top of each other. And we're going to mark it diagonally from corner to corner. so that we can get a nice diagonal line. And just so that, I just want to make sure that you're seeing this, because this is important. So we have this piece, you know, going that way, this piece going down, and we're just lining them up at the end so that it's sort of like a square. And we're going to take our ruler and set it on here, keeping these two pieces together so they make that square at the end. And from the tip of this top one, this corner, down to this corner where the bottom piece meets at this corner, we're going to line up our ruler diagonally, and we're going to mark it. I'm going to use chalk for this so that it shows up. So we have our diagonal line, and if we lift this piece up, you can see that the end of this diagonal ends right where the corner of that bottom piece is, and the top of it started right here on the corner of this top piece. And we're going to hold the two pieces together, and we're going to sew across that diagonal line. And this is the same way that you would do binding if you were doing it on a quilt or any other item. And there's no need to secure stitches on binding. Whenever we're piecing on a quilt or doing binding, you don't need to bother with doing knots at the ends or doing secure stitches. Just leave them the way that they are. And then you're going to take your piece and we're going to cut it. Now you can mark it if you want. I have one of those. I hope I don't get to hit the camera. All right, so I have this piece. It's just a 1/4 inch ruler. It's 1/4 inch on all sides. It's a square ruler. And you can lay it down there across and match it up to that line, and then draw another line if you want, which sometimes makes it easier for people to get their marking so that they know that they're cutting it straight. And we're just going to cut across that line so that we're cutting off the corner. And I'm going to trim my threads here just because they'll bug me. And then I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to open up my seam. Now some people prefer to press it so that the seam goes to the side. I find that a little bit bulky. So I'm going to open it up, and I'm just going to finger press it open. You could decide which way you prefer. I just know that we're going through a lot of layers with the foam and the two pieces and then adding this, so I went ahead and did mine this way. And once you have that finger pressed, you're just going to fold it back the way that it was when you pressed it. And I just run my finger across it, making sure that I keep the same line that I created when I pressed it in half. Okay, so now we've connected our two pieces. I'm going to go ahead and do our binding. Now on my walking foot, I have different attachments that go to the bottom. Let me move you over here so that you can see a little bit better. I'm going to try to get my camera just a little bit closer for you. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail before I start sewing, probably about 4 inches or so that I'm not going to sew yet. Oh, before I go to that, they did say to go ahead and do an 1/8 of an inch stitch around the edge. I'm not going to bother with this one. This one I'm keeping for myself, and I don't feel the need to do it for me. But if you're concerned with having everything, staying together and, locking up your stitches, you can go ahead and you can sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Just go kind of slow. Where I'm putting the binding on, I just didn't feel that I needed to do that on this one. I did do it on my other one because that one's getting sent off. So this one's just for me at home, and I'm not worried about doing that. But if you're concerned about it, go ahead and do your 1/8 of an inch stitch. You just go ahead and you'll stitch down the 1/8 of an inch. You'll stop 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Make sure your needle is down, pivot, sew 1/8 of an inch across. Make sure your needle's down, pivot, and just keep doing that all the way around until you get to the beginning. Like I said, I'm not concerned about it because we're going to be putting the binding on, and it's going to get stitching on this side and it's going to get stitching on the other side. And as far as I'm concerned personally, it's just my personal opinion. I feel that it's going to lock everything down from the two sides being stitched. So you go ahead and you do whichever you decide is best. You can either follow the pattern or decide to do it this way. It's up to you. So I'm going to leave a tail approximately 4 or 5 inches for connecting at the end. So I'm going to lay it down, and you want the edges, your cut edge, to be on the edge of the top of this. And this would be my back side. So on the other one, I have specific front and back. And also, the fabric is directional. So it was important to pay attention to which side I started on. Both sides are directional, and I had to make sure that my fabric stayed in the right direction on both sides before I did my crisscrossing. And so when I started on this one, I had to make sure that I was stitching my binding that I'm going to start now. You're going to do it on the back side. So whichever is the back side for you, on this one, I'm using the same fabric both sides, so it doesn't matter which one I choose to be my back side. But if you have different fabric that's going to be on the outside of your pouch and different fabric that's going to be on the inside, just make sure that you are stitching this to the back side. So I'm going to leave my tail, and I'm going to start a little bit past midway sewing. And I am going to stitch this all the way down until, and we're doing 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And I have with my walking foot, I have different attachments that can go in. If you do have, you could use a regular foot, that would be fine. If you have 1/4 of an inch guide foot, it would be wonderful to use. If you don't have it on your walking foot, if you have a separate foot that is like that, it would be great to use that right now. It just helps you to stay straight. Otherwise, you can use your regular foot and just watch your 1/4 of an inch, that you're getting your 1/4 of an inch as you're going around. But if you do have a walking foot that you can do that with, that's wonderful, because we're going through a lot of layers. Okay, so I've got my tail there, and as I'm putting it under my foot, I'm going to lift my foot up a little higher, so I'm not pushing this edge down, so I don't end up causing a pucker underneath and having it look all funny, especially since that's going to be my top side. And then once I get it there, I'm going to line up. I have my guide on the side, so I know I'm going to be getting my 1/4 of an inch. And so I'm going to sew, like I said, all the way to the end of this side until I'm about 1/4 away from the end. And I'm making sure that this stays straight up against the edge as I go. Now you could pre-mark this with some chalk to show where your 1/4 is. I tend to find that I'm not going to see it when I get it up there. So I kind of look from the side and I kind of guesstimate a little bit, and I can make a little bit of a mark here. I've gotten used to doing bindings, so I just kind of guesstimate. And you can almost see when it gets to that mark that if you made the mark. And I'm going to turn, and this is how I kind of figure it out. I know I got to go at least one more stitch. And so I'm going to move you around, and I'm going to try to get the camera down to where that you can see just a little bit better. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make you dizzy. I'm just trying to see if I can. I'm going to reposition this a little bit because I want you to be able to see. Okay, I had just a little bit of a blooper there, but I'm going to show it again. But I'll show you what I did. I sewed all the way down across until I got to 1/4 inch from the end. And then I pivoted my piece around so that I could see the corner, this corner right here, lined up with the center of my foot. And I sewed diagonally off and cut my stitches. And the reason for doing that is that I'm going to fold this straight up, and I want to have a nice diagonal line, and I'm just going to finger press it. I want to have a nice diagonal line from this corner down to where it's folded right here, and I want this side to be straight. And then I'm going to fold this down until the very end of this piece lines up with my edge and finger press it. And then I'm going to sew again 1/4 inch all the way down until I get to 1/4 inch away from the next edge. And I'll re-show that because I forgot to turn my camera back on after I adjusted it. And you want to make sure that you start right at the end. I think that's, let's see if it's moving along properly or if it got stuck. There we go. And like I said, you can mark it if you want. I just have gotten used to doing it, so. And I can check, I can see that it's off too much, it's too far. When I turn it, it's not going to, my corner is not going to line up with my needle. So I know that I need, let's see, probably another stitch. Yeah, that's pretty good. So I can see the corner. If I lift this up, I can see the corner right there of my pouch. And it's lined up with this center of my foot. And that's what I want. So I'm going to sew off diagonally across that. And when I get to the end, I just cut my stitch. And the reason why I do it that way, some people just show where they stop there and they just cut their stitch and they don't do the diagonal off. And the reason why I do the diagonal off is because it does help me when I fold my fabric. When I push my fabric up, it just helps create that fold that I need, that diagonal fold. And you want to make sure that it's staying straight right here. It's hard because I don't know if I'm getting enough lighting. I'm not going to know until after I filmed if I got this well. Let me see if moving my lighting over this way a little bit will help. So you just want to make sure that this is going up nice and straight and that this is staying at a diagonal. And then I'm going to push my fabric back down towards me, line my edge up with the edge, and make sure that the top of the fold is right up against the edge of this piece here. And it should make basically a square at the end. But I can feel my diagonal fold underneath that piece. And then I'm going to put it underneath my foot again. And you want to start right at the very end of that. And once again, I'm going to sew all the way down until I get 1/4 of an inch away. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm paying attention that my piece stays up against the edge. And with this being so many layers, I'm just going a little slower than I normally would sew. And making sure that I adjust my binding as I go, that it stays straight. And if you haven't done binding before, let me get to that 1/4 of an inch so that you'll be able to hear me over my sewing machine. Okay, and I'm gonna, once again, you can see my corner and it's lined up with the center of my foot, and I'm gonna sew off diagonally and cut my stitch. So if you haven't done binding before, I really recommend that you just take and make some sandwiches. Make sure that they're square. It can even be pot holder size, and practice some binding. It's a good tool to have. Normally when we're doing quilts, you would do a 2.5 strip, 2.5 inches wide strip, and you would fold it in half and you would do your 1/4 of an inch. And where this is a smaller project, they had you do a smaller cut width, which on pot holders we would do pretty much the same thing. We would do a 2-inch wide strip, and you can practice your binding on that. That's how I practiced in the beginning, was just on practice sandwiches, on placemats, on pot holders, things of that nature, so I could get used to doing binding rather than trying to do it on a big quilt. Or even a small quilt can be frustrating because you've gotten your quilt all done, all pretty, and you go to do your binding and it can be frustrating. So once again, I've got this straight. I stopped at 1/4 of an inch and I sewed off diagonally. And I'm just going to fold my piece up. Going to get that diagonal line, but I want to make sure at the same time I kind of push the corner down here a little bit. Let me see if I can. So I just kind of push this down with my finger so that I can get that straight line that I'm looking for, and making sure that I have my diagonal there, and then just bring your binding back toward you, line up the edges, And see how it's kind of crooked right now? I don't want that. That's not going to make a good binding. And when I go to do a mitered corner, I'm hoping that you can pick that up in the camera, that you can see that. See how it's folded sideways? That's not good. You can't have that. This has to be nice and straight so that it's flush with this top piece. And I want this to be at the very end so that it meets up on the fold down here, and it meets up with this. And I want it to meet up with the sides, and I want to make sure that this is staying nice and straight on this side. And I'm going to start at the end again, and I'll sew until I get to 1/4 of an inch. Hopefully I didn't go too far. Nope, I didn't go far enough. I need one more stitch. Let me see. Yep, that's lined up good. If I pull my piece back, I've got my corner once again right there, and it's lined up with that center. And I'm going to sew off at a diagonal and cut my thread, and that's my last corner. Trim my thread. And so once again, I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold it up and get that diagonal line. I'll pull this back down because I want it to stay straight. I want to get that diagonal, but I also want this side to stay straight so that when I fold this down, I'm going to get sort of what I consider to be kind of like a little box. And make sure that my side's straight and it's level over on that side. And I'm only going to sew, maybe about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to start at my end. And I'm going to sew until right about there. And I'm going to end off because I need to meet up my 2 pieces. And I need enough room to be able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And I probably didn't even need this extra piece that they have me put on, but possibly. So I'm going to lay this down, and I'm actually going to take, let me grab my seam ripper because I feel like I'm not going to have enough room. And coming this way, because when we go to lay them, just how we connected them in the beginning, we're going to connect them now. And I want to make sure that I'm going to have enough room to do that. So I'm going to take just a few stitches out on the other side. Not the side that I was just sewing on, but on the other side. And it's not a big deal if you've got to do this. You just want enough room to be able to join these 2 pieces, and you'll see in a minute what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to take, about 1 inch or so out. Take those extra threads off there so they're out of the way. Okay. So I'm going to lay this down. And I'm going to need about 2.5 inches on the end of here. So I'm going to take about, I don't know, about 1.5 inches or so off. And I'm just going to cut that off. So I folded it over, and I'm going to take off about 1.5 inches. I'm just going to make sure that I have that lined up. And I'm going to cut a little bit off. And I'm going to take my seam guide, throw that down in my scrap box. So I'm going to take my seam guide and I'm going to lay it on here. And I'm going to want this other piece, and you want the seam guide to be right at the end of the piece where you started. And I want it to be, I'm going to bring this piece over, and I want it to land right at 2.5 inches. And I'm going to fold it over when it reaches that. So I need this piece that I was sewing to be 2.5 inches over this side. So when this beginning piece is laying flat and I have my seam guide on there, I need this piece to overlap that piece by 2.5 inches. And I'm going to make sure that it's lined up and folded straight. I'm going to poke my scissors in there and I'm going to clip that off. And that can go into my scraps. So now this is kind of the tricky part, because we're going to put these pieces together. Let me see if I'm getting this in here so that you can see well. So once again, this piece is going to be going in this direction, and this piece needs to lay, and this is the trickiest part, I think, of binding, is that you need, and these have to go right side to right side. You need one going, the bottom piece going straight that way, and you need your top piece going straight down. And you want to get these so that they're laying on top of each other, nice and neat, just like we did in the beginning. And they need to be nice and flat. Let me make sure that we're getting that in the camera. So I have this top piece laying flat on top of there. Now this is the tricky part, is getting this marked with that diagonal line. So I need to hold that there and get my ruler. And I'm going to lay my ruler so that it's easier for me if I go from the diagonal up at the corner here and then down to this corner. And I'm going to hold my ruler just so that it holds that top piece together. Actually, I've got my ruler upside down. It'd be better to have it this way. I'm just going to make sure that I've got this going in a nice diagonal. I don't down here. And I'm just going to hold that real steady. And I like these creative grid rulers because when you press on them, they stay down real well. And I'm going to make my mark so I have a nice diagonal line there. So I can see where I'm going to need to sew. So the end of my diagonal meets up with the corner of the bottom piece down here. And, whoops, sorry about that. And the top of the line meets up with the top corner of the top piece up here. And so I'm going to carefully take that over to my machine. And I'm going to just follow that line, keeping these two pieces straight together. I'm going to sew across that line and join these two pieces. And you got to be careful that you don't fold your fabric underneath, because I've had that happen before. And go ahead and cut your thread. Now before we cut that corner off, we're going to test our piece. And we want to make sure that it's, see, I've got a little bit too much. And if I was to sew this right now, I would have a big bunch right there. And that would be a problem. So I'm going to take this apart, as frustrating as that can be. I don't usually have this problem with binding, but for some reason with smaller projects, sometimes it's like there's a little bit too much fabric. So I'm just going to take that seam out. And I think it was actually about 1/4 of an inch or so too long. And that's why we don't do any more cutting, because it's fine to have too much. We don't want to end up with not enough, because if we end up with not enough, we're going to do our binding all over, and that's not fun. I used to hate binding so much because it was so hard to figure out how to get it done, and now it's almost one of the easier parts. So on this end that I didn't draw on, I'm going to fold it over about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to trim it off. So I'm just going to take just about 1/4 of an inch off the end of this. I don't want to take too much off because I don't want to make it too short. Even if I have to take it apart again because it's too long, that's fine. I'd rather do that than end up with it too short. So we're going to lay that back down. And you want to make sure that you don't twist your binding either. We need this to be your right side up. This piece will be your right side down. And it does get a little bit tricky. Now with this is a small piece, I can just kind of fold it over. And then line these up so that I make my little square, keeping it nice and flat. See how I've got kind of a fold at this end? I can't have that when I go to sew it, because if I sew it with that there, I'm going to create a pucker in my binding. So you just have to fidget with it a little bit. I've already got my line, which is still my diagonal line that I need. So that's all set. I just have to get these laying nice and flat and get it up underneath my needle so that I can sew that. And I'm just going to go slow because I want to make sure that it's not puckering up at the end. And I'm just going to readjust my fingers, and I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping this down here so that that bottom corner, so the bottom piece, the corner of it, is matching up with that diagonal line there. And also keeping my two pieces flat. And like I said, this is a little difficult, especially in the beginning, if you haven't done binding before. If you've done binding before, you probably already have this done. And now we'll check it again. Before we do any more cutting, we'll check it again. And now, it looks like that will lay pretty flat when I go to sew it. So I'm going to pull this back out. And you could make your line if you want. I'm just going to guesstimate my 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do my trim, and I'm going to take that triangle off the end. Once you get used to doing binding for a while and piecing and stuff, you start to be able to see a 1/4 of an inch pretty easy. Or at least for me, I don't know. So I've got that. I'm going to finger press that, and then I'm going to put this back together. just like I did before when I joined my two pieces together. And I'm just going to make sure that that stays nice and flat. Don't worry about these fraying pieces on the end. It's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm going to put it back under there. I want to make sure that my pieces are all lined up against the edge. Lift my foot up so I can get it under there easier. And then put my needle down. And I went just a little bit past where I ended. I went backwards a few stitches. So I can sew back over them, which by sewing back over the stitches, then I know I'm securing those end stitches where I ended off. And I'm going to meet up with where I started and sew over those. And I will do a couple stitches in reverse and then come back to lock those stitches up now that I got everything lined up. And I'll go ahead and trim those threads. And I can stick those tools out of my way. So now you're going to take this and you're just going to turn it. You're going to turn it. So this was the side that we were sewing on. I'm just going to turn these edges out. And actually, before I turn it over, I'm going to finger press the seam. And you can open up your corners and let them go toward your front. And I'm just going to finger press this all the way around. It'll just make it easier when I go to fold my fabric over. Okay. And then you can turn it back over this way. And in the corners, I'm just pressing these corners down with my fingers to kind of flatten them out a little bit so that they're not going to be too thick when I come through to do my mitered corners. So I'm just going to flatten them out a little bit. That's where it's going to get the bulkiest when we come around. So on the corners, we're going to want to go nice and slow. Okay, so I've gone and I've changed out my foot. We're going to be folding or binding over like so. So it will be covering up our edges, and we're going to want to sew right along the very edge here. Now, some people like to sew in the center as they go down through. Mine will probably land right about the center. I use what they call a left edge top stitch foot. Try to get this over here so that you're able to see it a little bit better. I think being on the white, you can see the foot a little bit better. This is a left edge top stitch foot. The reason why I like it is because one side is a little bit higher. There's a little bit of a ridge there, and that ridge will go up against my binding like so, and it keeps things lined up. And there's a little, whoops, red line right here for me to pay attention. That's where the edge of my binding will be. And with that ridge underneath, the ridge of the binding goes up against that and kind of keeps me straight. And I had to practice for a little while because when I first started using it, it wasn't perfectly straight. And sometimes I still don't get it perfectly straight, but I at least get my binding on there for what I feel is pretty well. You could use a stitch in the ditch foot. Some people use a stitch in the ditch foot and they do the same thing. They'll take it and they'll put this up against where the stitch in the ditch part is, and I think it would be on this side. I can't remember. I don't use the stitch in the ditch foot very often anymore. So you would line it up, and your stitch in the ditch guide would be right up against here, and you'd be sewing a little bit to the side. If you don't have either one of the feet, and if your machine can use a left edge top stitch foot, you're going to be doing binding regularly, like say you're quilting and whatnot, and you're going to be doing binding quite often, I really recommend to get this foot. It comes in handy. It's worth the investment. Your feet last for the life of your machine, so it's really worth the investment. It's worth the investment to have your 1/4 inch guide foot. It's worth the investment to have your left edge top stitch foot. And some people use their stitch in the ditch foot quite a lot if they don't long arm or free motion quilt their quilts, because you could quilt the whole entire quilt just the way that we did with a walking foot. A lot of people use their walking foot. I'm just trimming some extra stitches here. Some extra threads, rather, not stitches, but threads. Getting them out of the way. Okay, so whichever way that you go about doing it, you're just going to want to stay on the edge. You could even do a decorative stitch down the edge to hold this edge down. I've done that quite often with pot holders and placemats and even quilts, because the decorative stitching, we don't get to use it very often, it seems like. And so it's kind of nice to use it. So I'm going to start about in the center. I'm going to hold this thread to the back. With my left edge top stitch foot, this edge of my binding is going to be right lined up with that line. Now, if you're using a different foot, if you're using a stitch in the ditch foot, this side of your binding will be up against your guide. If you're using a regular foot, let's take a look at that before I get going here. I have my regular foot here somewhere. I got a whole pile of feet sitting in my... So if you have a foot that has the 3 markings, you have the center marking and then you have 2 markings on the side, what you could do is have this foot in. Let me see. And then when you put it under, I would just have my binding go up against, you know, lined up with this line on this side. And my stitching would be straight going down the center of this. And if I just keep my binding lined up with that, or even up against the side of your foot right here, if you focus on that, you can keep it going pretty straight. Just go slow, whichever way that you're doing it. I've just got to check and make sure that for what I'm doing, that I put my machine onto the 1/4 inch. And I'm using 2.0 stitches. I like the small stitches for the binding. It holds everything down real well. And I still have my machine so it knows that I'm going through a heavier material. Okay, so I'm going to start somewhat in the center. And I'm going to sew until I get a little lazy in here. This is kind of difficult, trying to have it in the camera so that you can see it and sewing at the same time, because I don't want my fingers to be in the way of the sewing. I'm going to lift, whoops, sorry about that. I'm going to lift this up just a little bit higher. And try to get you in just a little bit closer. Sorry about that. But this is like going to be the trickiest part of the binding, and I want to make sure that you're going to be able to see what's happening when I get down to the end. And of course this is sounding a little bit loud because I'm going through so many layers. And so I'm just going to continue to hold this down and keep it lined up. And I'm about an inch from my edge down here. It's so hard for me to see what you're seeing, so excuse me. I'm sorry I'm adjusting the camera so much, but I'm wanting to make sure that you're going to be able to see this step. So I'm just going to scoot this side up, and I'm going to press the bottom down. And then I'm going to take a pin, and so I'm going to try not to get in the way. I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to slide it across and let it go down into the fold. And then I'm going to scoot this piece over so that it makes my mitered corner. So see how, like, this piece right here, I have this coming down and this going across, and they meet right up against each other into a little corner, and it stays a corner like that. And I'm just going to use my seam ripper to hold this down and get this lined back up. And you kind of have to hold on to that corner. And when you get close to it, then you can let it go, because your foot will hold it down. Now when I get about here, I know my foot's holding that corner down. And I'm just going to go slow because I am going through a lot of layers when I get there. And when my needle hits, so if I had this side folded over the same way, which all I did was I did like this, and that side presses over. And I lost my pin. Oh, there it is. I just slid my pin over until it got into the crease. Pull this side over. Oops. So that it makes my mitered corner. And sometimes it doesn't want to do it quite the first time that I'm doing it, and I have to readjust my fabric and push my corner down, and just run your pin across, and then pull this side up over and check it and see if they're both lining up with each other to make that nice little corner. You're just trying to make like an angle corner right there. And I'm going to line that back up at the top while I'm holding this corner down. And I'm going to sew all the way down to it. And you can even hold that down with a pin or an awl until you get close enough. And just let go. And when you see your needle reaches the center, so I want my needle to reach right here in the center between the two folds. Now it can, oh, darn pin. So it can land right there on the edge of your fabric that's coming this, you know, that folded over from this side. But, you know, right here in this fold is good. And then I'm going to pivot my fabric around. And once again, I'm going to fold this side over and line it up. And this is a long side, so I got to go a little ways. So I'm just going to keep that up underneath that guide. And go down to the next corner. And if you have any loose threads, you know, little frayed pieces or whatever, I just run my finger down through and I tuck them underneath, because no one's ever going to see them underneath there. And I just work this as I go down, making sure that my binding's staying nice and straight. I like using the wider binding personally, because it gives me a little more room to work with my fingers, but the pattern called for using the 2-inch, so that's what I'm using. And I'm a little ways from my corner, but I'm going to go ahead and set up my corner anyway. I got a thread here that's kind of stuck funny. I'm going to clip that out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and set up my corner now. And I like to press down on my corners, flatten them out a little bit if I can, take some of the bulk out of it. Get some of these extra threads out. I'm going to take my pin once again, and I'm just going to let it roll across my fabric and let it go down in the little crease between the two of these and pull this up over to make my mitered corner. And I'm really hoping that this is showing up well in the camera so that you can see. I'm not sure if I'm getting it so that you can see it, and that's frustrating me, because my fingers end up in the darn way. And I've only got 2 more corners to go, so I really want you to be able to see. And see how, like, this is, you've got your diagonal line here between the two. So once again, if I take this, let me pull it this way and see if this helps. So I'm folding this bottom piece straight across, and it folds right across, okay? And I'm just going to run my pin across it until it goes down into the fold between the two pieces, and I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to lift this piece up. And I'm just making sure that this stays tucked under there and gives me that little mitered corner, which basically you're looking at your piece having an angle. So it will come straight down here and straight across here and meet up in a little corner right there. And they call that a mitered corner. I'm really hoping that you're going to be able to see that well. But I have a perfect, well, close to perfect diagonal right here where my pin is. And I'm just going to hold on to that corner nice and tight. And I'm going to fold this piece over and get it lined back up. It's a little bit harder with the 2-inch wide than it is with the 2 1/4 to get this nice and straight. And I'm going to sew right until I get in between the two, the fold right there. Get this just a little bit. So I'm going to sew right until I get into that fold right there without my fingers being in the way. And stop. And then I'll pivot my fabric, and hopefully one of these corners I've gotten into the camera so that you could see it well. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set up my corner ahead of time. I'm going to pinch this corner, flatten it out, and I'm going to make sure I have this piece down bottom going flat all the way across. Let me see. So I've got this flat all the way across, and I'm just going to take my pin and run it across until it goes between the two pieces. And then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to pull this up, the binding up, so I can create that corner. And sometimes it goes really well, and sometimes I have to fidget with it. So let's try that again. See if I can get that to come up here. It's partly the way that I have it angled, and it's getting so it's not straight. So let me see, maybe if I move it this way a little bit. So I have this piece, so I folded it out like so. Take my pin, run it across until it gets into the crevice between those two pieces, and then pull this side up and flatten it out. And you'll have, or should have, an angle there. And I've got to do a little bit of fidgeting where this is a little bit narrower of binding. And it's some, you know, if you have your awl, you can hold it with your awl. I've got my seam ripper right here, so I can kind of hold it with that. And just hold that corner down. So I'm just going to kind of hold that corner like so. And line this piece back up so it's nice and straight. Until I get down to that corner. And I'm going to stop right when I get to where it's between, or right on the edge of that. And pivot around again. Hopefully I won't need my seam ripper. I don't like to play with my seam ripper if I don't got to. So, now we're almost at the end, so we're going to meet up where we started. And I didn't meet up quite perfect, but close enough. And I'm going to do a reverse right there, and then come forward. And I'm just going to go around and check. The other piece I had it go up a little bit right there like this one is. It wasn't as flat as I would like it to have been. And I actually did a little bit more on this one because I was trying to show you on the camera and I wasn't as focused as I should have been. But my easy fix for that is a little bit of fabric, permanent fabric glue. I'm just going to put a little bit there, and I'm going to put a little bit here and right there. And then I'm just going to press this down. I didn't quite grab that edge. So I'm going to use this piece when I go to sew, which I'll be show you when you in the next step. This piece is going to get sewn afterwards up against your vinyl, and I'll just take my side that didn't look as good and I will make that go up against my vinyl. My other one was much straighter. It's kind of hard in the camera to get my hands around, so I kind of got this one a little bit wavy, but that one's for me anyway. So this one was nice and straight compared to the other one. This one was all nice and straight. I did a much better job on this one. Like I said, it's kind of hard in the camera to move everything around so it looks as nice, but I was trying to make sure that you could see the steps of how to do the binding a little more clear. So with your vinyl, I'm going to use my quarter inch edge guide foot. You can use a straight foot, that's fine. You can just watch. You could, have it in straight stitch and just watch on your plate to make sure that you're getting your 1/4 inch. I just like using my guide foot. It makes my life so much smoother. Now with your vinyl likes to stick, especially to the metal and the plastic here. So I've got a piece of paper. You can use any paper. You could use parchment paper. You could use wax paper. Probably, maybe not the wax paper as much, but you could use copy paper, newspaper, just some paper underneath. This is so much easier than some of the ideas that, you could use your a Teflon foot if you have a Teflon foot, but I found that this vinyl was still sticking on my plastic on my table. Not as much on the metal, but it was sticking to the plastic on my table, and it was very irritating. So I went ahead and I grabbed some paper. And I just have to grab one more thing, and then we will go ahead and we'll put our binding on this. So the same thing for this piece. This piece we had cut our strips for our binding, and we folded them in half. And we're going to have our raw edges go to the outside of the binding, or vinyl rather. It's like I'm tongue-tied today. I don't know what's going on. So you're going to line the edge of it right up on your vinyl. And I'm going to put it under my foot here, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch stitch. But I'm going to change it so that my machine knows that I'm in woven medium, because this isn't as thick as my other piece. And I'm still going to be doing 2.0 stitches. And I'm doing my 1/4 inch. And you're just going to keep your binding up against the edge of that vinyl. I'm just checking to make sure that I got this up against there. I'm not it does somewhat want to slide over on you, so you kind of got to just hold on to it. And then I'll show you the trick to get the paper off the easy way. And there's no need to secure this either direction. You don't have to worry about that. Now, when you go to do this, just lift this side up. Right here, just lift this side up. Hold the paper down and just tear it against your seam. And the reason why I'm doing this, not just ripping, is because if you leave too much behind, you're going to have to sit here with tweezers and pick it all off. So I'm doing it this way to make it a little bit easier for me. And when I flip it over, it's been perforated with the smaller stitches. It's perforated your paper. So now you can just kind of pull your paper from the top. And the majority of your paper, if you go nice and slow across, is going to come right off. And if it did leave any little pieces behind, you can go behind with your tweezers and just pull them out. Just gently pull the little pieces out. I don't have any. The first time that I went and did my first piece on the other one, I had all kinds of pieces stuck on here. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm going to fix that so it's easier. So I'm going to finger press this along the seam on this side. I'm just going to finger press it. So it goes and folds. And just like we did with our other binding, we're going to fold this over, and the same thing, we're going to do a 1/4 of an inch. A 1/4 of an inch. We're going to use the, well, I'm going to use the left edge top stitch, but you can do it the same way that you did your other binding. I lost my foot. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to change out my foot. And I just created a knot in my thread, so I got to re-thread. Whoops. Oops, if I put it on the right way. I'm going to trim my stitches at the end here, if I can. I had to find my scissors. My stuff's going all over the place. Now the only difference with this is we're not going to be binding it all the way around. We're only going to bind one side, and then we're going to bind the other side. So we don't have to do the whole pivoting thing and folding thing and whatnot. We just need to fold it straight across. I'm wanting to use this paper a few times, so we're just going to fold it over. We're going to go ahead and get that under there and get it started, and we're just going to sew our straight line. And then once again, I'm just going to lift this up. And I'm just going to gently tear it. because with those smaller stitches, it just perforates that paper and makes it a lot easier to get this off. And then I'll take my other side off, and I'm all good. I'm just going to tear that part of my paper off. And so we have that side all done. So that looks pretty nice. I'm hoping you're being able to see all this. Jeepers. Keep forgetting to move my camera. I'm sorry. So I'm going to trim my stitches. And I'm just going to check this. I'm going to hold it up and I'm going to check and make sure that my fabric is lined up with the edge of the vinyl. And I'm going to clip off any excess if it's over from the vinyl. I only had one side that was just a little sliver. Just a sliver over. Not much. Okay. So you would go ahead and you would do your binding on the other side of that, which I've already done. On this piece, so I'll do that one later. But I've already got this one all done. So we're all set with that. So now our next step is to sew our vinyl to the bottom of our pouch. And we're going to sew a little bit of a box. So your main piece is going to lay up against your vinyl piece, and your binding here where it ends up off the top, we want that to line up against this. It's going to be completely over it. So let me try to show you on the back side how that's lining up. If I do it from this side, I'm wanting the bottom of the binding of this to meet up with the bottom of the binding of this. So they're kind of going to be scooted up against each other. And I want to make sure that it lines up well from edge to edge. So those need to be pressed up against each other. So from this side, you'll see that it's like a little more than a ½ inch. Okay, so I just took this and I met it up against this one, and they kind of almost lock into each other, kind of like when you're piecing 2 rows of quilting. But I'm going to turn it back around. And let me see. I'm trying to think what's going to be the easiest way. I'm going to put this back onto paper because I don't want that vinyl to stick, and I don't want this sliding all over the place on me. So I'm going to put that paper back under there. If you don't have parchment paper, you can take like a couple pieces of copy paper and tape them together, and that would work just fine. I'm just going to scoot this piece up so it lines up on the bottom. You want to make sure it lines up here on the top and it lines up on the bottom. I can see that okay. And then I just kind of push on it so that it's locking into each other. And so we're going to sew kind of close to the edge over here on this side. And then we're going to sew all the way down to the corner. We're going to pivot, sew just a little tiny bit here, and then we're going to sew over this binding line, or yeah, binding line, the edge line here, and back over. So it's going to make kind of a box, and it will make it sturdier for you so that these two pieces don't come apart. I'm just going to double check that I have this lined up well. Okay. So, let me see. Probably going to use my 1/4 inch guide foot. Let me see how that goes. I just have to oh, there it is, right over here. Let me take a look at this, because I hadn't done this part ahead of time. Most of the parts I did ahead of time so that I would know what I was doing as I went. But this part I did not. So let me see. If I go this way, I'm going to end up on that line. And if I go... Oh, I'm throwing stuff on the floor now. And if I go this way, I'll end up about on that line. Okay. So I'm going to do this edge first. And I've got my guide foot so that it's going to guide up against that. And I'm making sure that those are pressed up against and knocked into each other. And there are some pictures in the instructions to help out. And there's a lot of thickness there when you first put your foot in. So just go real, or your needle in, just go real slow right there. Because this is a lot of thickness. So I'm just going to check as I go that I have these locked up against each other. And it looks like I do. So I'm just going to pivot this around a little bit so that you can get a view of that side. So I'm getting, and I'm not perfect with it, but I'm getting my line that goes across the top here. I would probably need to practice a little bit more on these to get it a little more perfect, but it won't be bad for my first one. Now when I get close to the edge, I'm going to slow down again because I'm going to be hitting a lot of thickness again when I get down to this end here. And you're just going to want to be really careful, go slow for this corner here, because there's quite a bit of thickness in that corner. Give your machine time for that needle to go through. And I'm going to go ahead and pivot. And I'm going to go slow again. I'm going to fold this a little bit in over here. My goodness, I forgot to turn my camera again. I'm sorry about that. Let me get this bent down here so that you can see a little bit better. So I'm going to pivot around the corner. Whoops. And I'm going to stay going slow because I'm going through quite a bit of thickness. And I'm going to sew across this. So I've got my guide that's going up against the edge of this binding here. And when I get to that corner again, I'm going to go slow. And I want to make sure that my guide piece doesn't go underneath my binding over here. So I'm just going to go through this section. Did I go the wrong way? Oh my goodness. I can't believe I just did that. Well, you know what? I'm just going to sew it down to this side so it looks all the same. And do a fix there. So hopefully you're not sewing as you're watching me, so that you can see where my mistake was. My goodness. Well, I suppose if I make mistakes, then you get to see them. So we would have gone around the corner, and when we got to here, we would have stopped, and we would have come back this way and sewn back over our line. But, you know, now that side's going to be a little extra secure. And so I'm going to have this side up against my guide foot. So I'm going to be almost following my line. And just go slow once again, because we're going to be going through quite a bit of thickness here. And you don't want to... Uh-oh, I think I'm going to... Oh, there we go. I can scoot it back out. No, I'm going to have to cut that. I shredded my thread. Okay. So I just rethread my needle. No big deal. And once again, let me grab that thread. I'll hold it down so it doesn't shred it again. And I'll start. Make sure that my needle's right at the end there. And go slow, like I said, so you're not breaking your needle going through, giving your machine a chance to go through those extra layers. When I get down to this end, I'm going to go slow again because I'm going to be going through some extra layers where these two meet up. And instead of going down this side like we weren't supposed to, we're going to go up straight when we meet that corner over onto the other side here. We'll pivot over and finish up that edge. Now I want to go slow here because I've got quite a bit of layers that I'm going through. And I really don't like breaking needles. Okay, it's right to the edge, so I'm going to turn this. And I just want to be sewing right up against that last edge. Trying to fold this so it stays down. And just go slow through here, because you're still going through all those layers. And I'm going to do a fix here. You can go in reverse. We want to lock those stitches and then come back forward. And cut your thread. Trim my thread end here where we started, and a couple of threads underneath, and then We're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're just going to lift this up easy and let that paper perforate. I'm going to do it from this side. I think it will be a little easier for me to grab it. And even if it doesn't do it perfectly, it's not a big deal. You can still get, and it's not. Oh well, that's okay. Down that extra way that I didn't need to go. Trim that, and I'm just going to take my tweezers. I'm just going to take my tweezers here so I didn't get it ripped off as nicely. And I'm just going to take my finger and run it through the center. Of my seam and just let some of that paper come out. It's a little bit messy, but I'm used to it from doing machine embroidery, because with machine embroidery you always have, well, not always, but quite often you have tearaway paper that you have to pull out. When you do a lot of that, you get used to having to get this extra paper out. So that got most of it out, and you can just take your tweezers and pull those extra pieces out that you need to get out. It just takes a couple minutes. So go ahead and get those pieces pulled out. And then we'll be on to the next section. That didn't do too bad. And I got it on the right around the right side, so that was good. Because I forgot to look and see which was top and bottom, I think. I can't remember now. Okay, so now we're ready to attach our zipper. And on one end, we're going to leave it about 2.5 inches past, and on the other end, about 1.5 inches. So to prepare our zipper, what I did was, sorry about that, I'm skipping a step. So I had a 30-inch double zipper, and I cut it. So I had a double zipper, and I cut it at the 22 inches. Okay, and I took one of my zipper pulls off completely, and I left the other one on here. This might end up later on being a smaller zipper. I'll just need another zipper pull because I'm going to use the other one for that one. So I cut this off completely at 22 inches, okay? And on the other end, I cut it off where it had this metal piece. So I cut it just a little bit past that metal piece, and then I measured and I cut it at 22 inches across. Okay? So I'm going to set that piece aside because that's going to be for my other one. And this zipper is just a little bit wider than my binding. I'm going to leave about 2.5 inches on one end longer, give or take. And I'm going to stick a pin in here because I want to line up the bottom of my zipper with my binding. Or I was thinking I was going to be able to do that. Oh, I'm going to be going through the vinyl, that's right. Okay, so that second thought, let me see. Probably just going to have to hold it real careful as I go, I guess. And line it up. And I'm going to do my first stitch. Because we're going to, so we're leaving a little bit longer, like 2.5 inches down here. Approximately an extra 1.5 inches down here. And we're going to be sewing just like we did down here. We're going to sew a rectangle around. And I'm going to want it lined up so that the bottom edge of my zipper goes with the bottom edge of my binding. Just because I think that will look better. And I'm trying to think what will be the better side to sew this from. Probably start on this side over here. Darn vinyl sticks to everything. I'm going to stick a piece of paper under there, but I'm not going to sew on it. I'm just going to stick it under this side just so that it doesn't stick to my table. But I'm not going to bother putting it under where I'm going to sew. I'm just going to get it under the vinyl so that this piece of the vinyl isn't sticking on me. And I'm going to line that zipper up like I said. Whoops, I've got to leave my 1.5 inches on this end. And I'm going to line the bottom edges up with each other. And I'm just going to watch as I go that I'm lining it up. And I'm still using my 1/4 inch guide foot. And I'm going to get the top edge of my binding up against the guide foot. And I'm just going to watch as I go. And I'm just going to line that zipper up as I go and hold it in place. And I'll just check it every so many inches just to make sure that I'm keeping it nice and straight. This is the first time I've made one like this. So far it's not been too bad. I think I could have done a little bit better with some practice. I'm going to get right to the edge and I'm going to pivot around and I'm just going to sew down just a little bit. I'm trying to think how I'm going to get this so that it's the rectangle that they're talking about. I think I'm just going to cut my thread there. And foot. And I'll just sew another line, just so I have like 2 lines. I think that's mostly what they want you to do, is to have a double line so that it's more secure on the zipper. And I'll cut that. Okay. I don't have to worry about my paper. Now I did notice the way that I did my flap. This is kind of sticking up a little bit. I didn't get all my paper out yet. I'll worry about that after. I'll poke that all out after. But if you wanted, it's up to you. You could do another line if you want this to be down flatter. But I knew if I did that, it was going to make a line across this here. And where this is white fabric, I didn't want to muck it up with doing that, like it said to do in the instructions. So that's where I did a box around that one. Just in case you're wondering why I veered from their instructions on that part and did it just a little bit different. Now on the other one it wouldn't matter because it's red and it wouldn't show as bad, but where I have white fabric on this, it would show up more. And it doesn't really bother me that this is flapped up under here. I know it's nice and secure because I did the rectangle around. Okay, so with this part, I need to get my zipper pull back on before I can continue to sew. So I'm going to, now this is a little bit tricky and it took me a few minutes to get this when I was doing it earlier. So let me get my camera over here a little bit so you'll be able to see what I'm doing, hopefully. So I'm using a fork. They showed in a video that I was watching using a 3-prong fork. What I had to do was I had to take something and push this prong out a little bit so I had enough room to get this down. And you have 2 sides to your zipper foot, okay? You have a flat side, and then you have this other side that's like a half circle. We're going to be putting the zipper down through the half circle side. Now I'm not going to stick my fork, whoops, the other way. I'm not going to stick my fork in between here because this is where the zipper is going to be coming out. So I won't be sticking my fork up through here. But this bottom part here, where your pull is attached to, I'm going to slip that over my fork, just so that my fork is holding it, basically. Try not to poke yourself with your fork. Now they say that you can do this with a plastic fork as well, if you have a sturdy plastic fork. So it's sitting in my fork like this. Okay, and my other side is sticking out like that, and I'm hoping that you're getting a good visual of that. And I had to practice at this a little bit to get the hang of it. And so this will be a little tricky for me to show on camera, mind you. And let me see. I have to think about this again in doing it. Alright, I'm going to do it this way, I think. Let me think about this for just a minute. I've got the wrong side going up. Oh my goodness. I need this oval side up. and this in the flat part going down in my fork. So let me show you that again. I just learned how to do this today, so this will be interesting. Okay, so let me show you again. I've got the oval part at the top of my fork, okay? And I've got the flat side down at the bottom. And I've just got this side slipped into the fork like this. It's just holding it for me. Excuse me. Now the tricky part, okay, we'll do it like this. Let me see, because I'm gonna, yeah. So we're doing it from the back side of the zipper, sort of. This is where the stitching is. Let me get this over here so you're going to be able to see it. So the front side of the zipper, that side, needs to go into the front side of this, where the pull is. And so we're going to stick this in here, and when we do, we're going to do it at sort of an angle. I really don't like their idea of doing it. I'm going to trim these down. I'm going to put both of my pieces together. Because I want them the same size. And I need my jaguar scissors to cut these with. And I'm going to leave myself some room in case I have to trim them again, but I'm going to cut them so that they're the same size at the end, because I think it makes it easier. So I have my pull piece in here, and I'm going to go with this at an angle. So I've got this side and this side both. And I want both of them to be going in at the same time at an angle, like so. And just push them down into the zipper part. Let me see. It really helps if you can get them going at an angle. And of course, once I did this, it was working just fine each time I tried it. But now I'm trying to do it on camera. And I'm trying to make sure that you're being able to see how I'm doing it. And some of you probably already know how to do this. But this was all new to me. I had never done my own zippers before. So you kind of got to get them going at the same time in there at an angle. There we go. Now we got it. And you just have to get a hold of the bottom of that and just pull it through. And take it off the fork. And then you just test your zipper to make sure that it's nice and straight. And then we can turn this, well, we'll wait and turn it after because we've got to sew this on this side. I knew I could do it. Hopefully that got on camera. And you just have to fidget with it just a little bit to get it. So let's do it one more time just to be sure that everybody's been able to see that. And it's, you just have to get them in there at the same time. And going in from an angle. And it's really not as hard as it looks. It's just the angle that I'm trying to do it at to show you. And then once you get them down there enough, okay, so now it's down there and it's locked in. I can grab a hold of it. There we go. And then you just get that off the fork. And then just run your zipper up through. Like so. And we got it zipped. And you just double check it, make sure that it's running back and forth real nice. And I'm hoping that I was able to get that so that you could see it well. So our next step is that we're going to line this up. And I'm going to put a clip right here to make sure that my vinyl is nicely lined up. And we're going to trim the end of that zipper so that it's lined up with the vinyl right here. That shot way across my table. Okay, so we'll clip the rest of it. And you want to make sure that you get your binding here even. So it looks nice and neat when we put it together. And the vinyl likes to stick together. It's kind of humid here today, so my vinyl is sticking just a little bit. So if you need to, just lift it up and reposition it so that it's lined up nice and even on your edge. And then line up your bottom and do the same thing, clip that. And I'm going to put a couple of clips on the bottom. We don't have too much more to go to finish up our pouch. I think they're going to be pretty cute. So I am going to set this on a piece of the paper just so that my vinyl's not sticking as I go to move. And just make sure that your machine is still set to the woven heavy. And I want to be in 2.0 stitches. There. So we're going to do a 3/8 inch seam. That vinyl does like to stick, so you just have to keep an eye on it. I'm going to get that paper under there a little bit more. I don't want to sew on the paper, but I want to get it under there so that as I'm passing through, it's not sticking on me. And I want to make sure that I keep this lined up when I get it up under there so that stays nice and even. And I want to make sure that I have it all the way up under the needle when I start this out. And I'm going to turn my machine down again. Because I know there's going to be some areas that we're going to go through a few more layers. So we're going to sew 3/8 of an inch seam all the way down through here and all the way across the bottom. And we'll pivot when we get to the corner, so you just want to make sure that when you get to the corner that you have your needle down. And then we can pivot on the corner and finish off this side seam. Now I am going to secure these stitches up here, so I'm going to take about, whoops, always makes me nervous. I think my needle's going to break when that happens, but my machine's pretty good about it. I think I started right in the teeth. I just had to wait a second so that my machine knows that. And it's just going to take me a second. I'm gonna have to undo that needle so I can get that out of there without breaking it. Hopefully, that's going to let me. There. I just have to lift my foot. So we're just going to have to be careful that we go just below those teeth when we start out. Now when we're done, we're going to come back and we're going to zigzag over this to seal up the end of our zipper, but where the zipper's doubled up like that, it's making the zipper a little bit stronger. Now I'm just going to get my needle back up in here. Without my thread being stuck in it would be good. And you never want to over tighten your needle knob right here. What I do is I hand tighten it, and then I just give it one little tiny turn, because part of the reason why my needle didn't break is because it still has some of its flexibility. If you over tighten your needle, it will be in there too tight, and it doesn't have the ability to do a little bit of flexing, and will often, if you run into a jam like that, it's going to bust your needle, which is never good. That never makes me happy. Okay, and I'm going to need to re-thread that real quick. Okay, I'm going to get this line back up, and I'm going to make sure that I'm past my zipper this time. And on my 3/8 mark. And it decided it wanted to finish the motion that it was supposed to be in. Okay. And I am going to, like I said, I'm going to go in reverse. I'm just going to be careful that I don't end up hitting. Well, and I broke my thread. It's not liking them. I'm actually going to cut. I think I got it into the tension. I think it pulled into my tension. So I'm going to pull that out. It was too tight in there, so it shredded my thread on me. Just the little things that you run into when you're sewing. And it'll only take me a second to re-thread my machine. Okay. Let's try it again. My machine does not like that area. And that is with a denim needle. I've used that denim needle quite a bit though. So I'm just going to use my hand wheel and so I can get that up out of there. I'm going to change my needle out. I used it for the Valley Bowl tutorial the other day on a couple of Valley Bowls actually, and then I was using it on these two Hello pouches, and I might have dulled my needle some. So I'm just going to quickly change the needle out and see if that helps me along. Really should only use a needle 8 hours anyways. And I probably was getting pretty darn close to that with that needle. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a little look at the situation that we have here, because that should be able to go through. I've gone through thicker layers than that with my machine before. I'm just trimming some of this frayed part off. Okay, let's see what happens. If it's going to be nice to me or not. Get that that lined back up. I'm going to start down just a little bit further. I'm going to do a reverse and hope. And I'm going to go slow just because I want to give that needle a chance to get in there. I'm just checking to see how close I'm getting to my zipper part. I'm going to take one more stitch. Let me see. Okay, that should be good. I'm going to come back down. And I should lock those stitches in place for me. Now when I get down here, I'm going to be going through some more thicker layers, and we're just going to have to go slow. I'm double checking my top. I want to see how close I got. Kind of not sure I like that like that. Let me take a look at this. Yeah, I'm going to check that when we get down through after we're done sewing and see if that's going to need a couple more stitches or not. And where my vinyl keeps sticking on me. It's been pretty humid today. We're getting some rain now, but it's been a little muggy. Which is funny because now that it's raining, tomorrow it's supposed to be cooler again, so the weather doesn't know what it wants to be. And I'm just getting these lined back up, making sure that I have them nicely together, the edges. I'm going to put that clip back there to hold it for a couple minutes. I don't want this puckered when I come down through. So I'm just readjusting that vinyl underneath to make sure that I'm not going to get a pucker in it as I go through. Okay. I know that's going to be a lot of layers. So we're just going to go through nice and slow. And I'm going to change my machine back. I had it on vinyl for a minute there. I'm going to change it back so that it knows and it's going to woven heavy again. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to go really slow. I'm trying to make sure that I'm staying at my 3/8. This was going to be a tough spot to go through because this is quite a bit of layers. And I'm just using my hand wheel through here, just helping so I'm not over pushing the machine to go through. As there are a lot of tough layers with that vinyl there. Okay, now we should be good. It's just where these two bindings were together, and then you had the vinyl in between. So we had a lot of layers with the binding being folded over, and then the extra layers in here. Now we're on the side of the vining, so it shouldn't be as bad. I'm still going to go a little bit slow because I do have some extra layers in here. But it won't be as bad now. Let's check. I should be... Yep, I'm going to get my 3/8. I'm going to get down to that corner. I can move my paper out of the way. And I'm going to sew this right to the edge, and then reverse, and then back to the end, and cut and through. Trim my threads down here. I think I got a little piece of that paper stuck in here. I'll just pull that out. Having the paper underneath the vinyl really helps a lot. Yep, that looks pretty good down there. Okay, so we're going to do a tight zigzag right here. I'm going to try, actually I'm going to turn it this way so that I can see the teeth, because I can see how the teeth are laying down sideways sort of a little bit right here. So I'm going to stay away from that very, very end, but I'm going to do a tight zigzag across here. And let me see. I just need to find the stitches on my machine. Okay. So it's going to be sort of like a applique type stitch. And I'm going to do them so that they're at 1.5 in width, or length rather, and let me see, 4.0 should be good for the width. So 1.0 at 1.5 rather for the length, and then 4.0 for the width, and making sure that we're in woven heavy. And I'm going to come at it from this side, from the bottom, and let it zigzag up. I want to see where my teeth are so that I'm not trying to get into those teeth. And I'm going to go slow, and I'm keeping it right at the 3/8. But I'm going to go slow with it and give the machine time to work in those stitches, because it is pretty thick there. And I think that's not going to be good. Let's see. I'm actually going to come into the 1/4 inch because I want the zigzag to be closer to the edge. So let me see where I need to be. I think at the 1/8 actually. So I'm going to line my edging up with almost the center of my foot is what I'm going to do. And we'll see how that does. Alright, I'm going to have to test out the stitches and see. Yeah, that should be good, because then that catches the edge. And that's what I want to do. I want to kind of lock up that edge. And I'm just going to go slow, because I'm getting kind of closer to the teeth area. Okay, one more stitch, and I'm going to go in reverse back over it. And that's making it a little bit heavier because my vinyl was sticking. Okay. And so that'll keep it pretty good right there. I'm just going to trim this extra thread. I've got a little piece of thread here. And I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. And I'm going to take, and I'm going to put just a little bit of fabric glue over this, permanent fabric glue. Ugh. I really like the Aleene's permanent fabric glue. And I'm just going to squirt a little bit on there, and I'm going to rub it around both sides. So even though I've stitched it there, I just want to make sure that this end of the zipper isn't going to be unraveling and fraying. So putting just a little bit of glue on here will kind of ensure that those stitches stay in there a little bit better. And I just rub the excess off with my finger, and I'm going to push down these frayed pieces. And that should really help keep the stitching in there real good. Let's trim that. Sometimes just a little bit of glue really helps. So not a lot, and it won't take that long. I think I left my fingerprint on here. Just clean this part off so it doesn't glue down here. But that little bit of glue right on the end is going to help keep those stitches nice and neat. Okay, so now we're just going to scoot our zipper with our finger so that we open the bag up. And we're going to turn, oh, wait a minute. No, we're not. Skip that thought. We're going to do our box corners first. I forgot all about that. You definitely want to do our box corners so that it stands up nice and straight. Okay, I'm just going to grab a tool. Okay, so one of the things that I don't want to forget to explain, when I made mine, I used a little bit of a thicker foam stabilizer. It's what I had on hand, and I thought it would be a nice choice. I had a couple of other things, but I was thinking that it was going to make it nice and stable, so it's going to sit up better. And in hindsight, I'm thinking that it might have been a little too thick. So when you get your kits, it won't be the same as what I use, so don't fret. I just wanted to let you know. So if you're watching my tutorial, I don't scare you away from making your pouch. Okay, so now we're going to make our box corner. And I'm going to, let me see here. This is not exactly how they show it in the picture looking, but the way that they had us sew it, it leaves a seam. And it didn't say anything about cutting the seam down, so I'm not going to do it. So you're just going to lay this down. I didn't know if I was going to need my tool to get in there and straighten out my corner or not. And I'm making the medium size bag on this one. So just look at your pattern and see how far up, depending on what bag you're making, how far up you need to go. And I'm just going to lay this down flat without squishing up my vinyl too much. And I'm checking too, because I don't want to get a crease over in here. I want this to come out flat. So you might have to pull your sides out a little bit, and you might have to poke your hand in there to help you flatten it out a little bit. And just make sure that both sides are nice and flat, not scrunched up on you. And then I'm just going to lay it flat, like so. And I'm going to get my Frixion pen so I can make a mark when I measure. And you're just going to use your 45-degree angle. And let me see, I need to be 1.5 inches. So I can see that right here I'm at 1 inch. I've got my, let me see, I'm hoping that this is showing up well. I've got my 45-degree line going across the edge here. And I can see that I'm at 1 inch there. And I want to scoot it down so that the half is right on that corner. And I'm going to make a little mark on my bag so that I can see where that was. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And where mine's a little bit thicker, it's not able to lay down as flat as I wish it would, but and I'm just making sure my 1/2 inch is lined up with my seam line. And I'm going to make my line over there. And now that I have my 2 lines made, one on each side, yeah, I definitely, in hindsight, would not have gone with as thick of a foam. And I had mentioned that earlier today so that the kits won't be made up with a thicker foam, and she said she'd already thought of that. So, you guys will be all set. And I'm going to make a line across. And I'm going to make sure that my bottom seam is flattened out as well, so that when I sew through this, it won't be quite as bad. And you're going to sew straight across your line. I'm going to have to squish it down a little bit to get it in here. Okay, and I got to remember to go back into straight stitch. Okay. And that kind of squished my fabric over. I'm going to lift this back up. Make sure I'm lined up with my line. Put my needle down. And I am going to secure my stitches. I'm going to go forward about 3-4 stitches. And then I'm going to reverse until I get to the end. So I'll have a nice corner there. Get that back and forward. Trying to make sure that the edge of, well, I'll wait till I get a little closer here. And we see how I do going through. And I'm just going to go slow through here because I know I'm going through some extra layers. Okay. I'm going to sew to the end and then I'll reverse again. And come back to the end. And cut my thread. And so we're going to trim our threads here. And then we're going to trim this 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So I'm going to take my little 1/4 inch tool. You can use a ruler if you have a ruler instead. That's fine. I like my little 1/4 inch ruler. It comes in pretty handy quite often. And get my pen and make my mark. Make sure I got that lined up well with the other line. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim that off. There we go. Plop that into the garbage. Now while I have this right here, you have your last 2 pieces of binding, and you had them, you know, cut in your rectangle, and you just folded them in half and pressed them. So, just like that. So we're going to sew this to the bottom of this, and then we'll flip it up around and sew it to the top, just like we did our other binding. And you want your raw edges of your binding going on the outside. Let me see. Okay, I just want to make sure they weren't going to give me any extra special instructions with it. It's always good to double check your instructions to make sure you don't forget something. I'm going to put my 1/4 inch guide foot on. Okay. And when I get to that seam area, I am going to slow down again. Just to give my machine time to work. This is just adding another extra layer to it, so I definitely would not recommend using the foam that I did. But that's how we learn. We try something and we learn from it. So then we're just going to flip this back up around. And I'm going to put a clip on here. I can't say that I actually totally understand putting the binding on like this because it's going to leave the edges raw on the end. It's saying to take the binding edges and, let me see, wrap the binding edges under the fold. Okay, so they're saying to wrap the binding edges under the fold and then fold it up. Like so. So it's going to kind of look like this by tucking it underneath. I was thinking it wasn't going to be very good to leave those raw edges stuck out there. So we'll do the same on this side. We'll just tuck this underneath. And wrap it up over. And you're kind of scooching it out. So your binding kind of is going to go in a V over here, sort of. By tucking that up underneath. And I'm going to put a little clip there for a moment. And then I'm going to put a little clip here as well, and I'm going to pinch this down a little bit to flatten it just a little bit. I'm definitely testing my machine on its ability to go through so much fabric. But it won't be the first time that it's been tested. I've gone through a lot of layers of denim before. So I'm going to take that clip off, and I'm going to get this under here, and I'm going to keep using my 1/4 inch guide. I'm going to get my finger out of the way. Okay. And once again, this is going to be a lot of layers, well, especially for me. A lot more than I really probably wanted. So just go slow. Turn my hand wheel past this, because I really did get this way heavier than I was figuring it was going to be. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of help over those layers. Now, if you are using the interfacing that Seaside is going to be giving you with the kit, you won't have as thick of layers as I do. When you do yours. And back onto the edge. And cut my thread. And there we go. That edge is done. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to do your other side the same way. Now on my other side, I don't have as many layers as I had on that side. Because you don't have that extra binding coming down on the side. So you just lay this down flat. Make sure that you get this coming out, your point is nice and even. And you're going to use that 45-degree angle, and once again you're going to find your 1.5 inch mark coming up from the diagonal line. Oops. And you'll make your mark on the side. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. Oh, going to draw your line across. So you'll know what line to follow to sew on. And I need to make sure I remember to put my machine back into straight stitch. Okay. There we have to push this down a little bit so I can, whoops, I gotta change my foot too. Go back to my straight stitch foot. And even though I don't have as many layers, I'm still going to slow down a little bit when I get to that binding. And it won't be as bad. So I'm going to go forward about 3/4 stitches, and then I'm going to reverse just to secure, and I go all the way back to the edge. And then come forward, and like I said, I'm going to slow down a little bit when I get to that binding. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to reverse for about 3/4 stitches. And then come out to the end. And cut my thread. And we'll do the same thing on this side like we did on the last side. We'll make our 1/4 inch mark. This side was definitely easier than the other side. And just get that lined up. Make your mark. And then we're going to cut that a 1/4 inch away from our stitching. Move some of this stuff out of my way. And I'm going to go back to my 1/4 inch guide foot. And you can use your regular foot and just watch your 1/4 inch. It's just easier for me to use my guide foot. Once again, we're going to stitch this to the bottom first. And you just kind of want to center it on here. I'm going to, I forgot to last time, but I am going to put a little clip down here to hold this on until I get down there. Okay. So now we'll sew this onto the bottom side. And once again, once I get to that binding area, I'm going to slow down a little bit and give my machine a chance to go through the stitches. There we go. And I'll trim those threads again. Get those out of the way. And we're just about done with our bag, or pouch rather. Okay, so once again we've got this folded out. We're just going to scoop the edge in a little bit And we just want to get the edges in there. I think my other one went a little bit easier than this one as far as folding this up. Okay, I'm going to put a little clip right there first. Now that I've got my binding pushed up to where I need it to be, I just put a little clip there to hold it. And then just tuck in your edges. I think the other side cooperated with me a little bit better. And I'll tuck in that other side when I get to that side. And I'm going to secure, let me see. Wait a minute. This one is not playing as nicely with me, which is okay. I'm just going to move my needle over a couple notches to the right. So that I make sure, because I got to make sure that I catch that binding as I go across. Do any good if I don't get it. And I'm going to go in reverse and secure that. And then go ahead and go forward. And I'll slow down again when I get to that binding in the center. Keep scrunching up my vinyl here. Through that binding. And I'm going to scoop this piece under like I did the other side. So I've got my edges tucked in. And I'm going to reverse, oops, and I'm going to go forward. And we'll trim those stitches off, or threads rather. I don't know why I keep saying stitches. I got stitches on the brain, I guess. So the one other thing, just because I know that we barely tucked those edges under, I'm personally going to put just a little tiny spidget piece of glue right on there. Whoops. I'm just going to put just a little bit right where I know those edges are, because even though I tucked them under, I just want to make sure that I keep it from fraying. I want to keep my bag looking nice, or my pouch rather, for a while. So I'm just going to put just a little bit of the permanent fabric glue down in here and secure that, and I'll just press that. figure better safe than sorry. I don't want to wait and end up regretting that I didn't put a little bit there to secure it, so I'll go ahead and do it. And I just press it with my finger to get any excess off. And I'm just going to go under where I know I might need a little more security on those stitches. Okay. Had to wipe my finger off. I'm just going to finger press this bottom seam down. And then, I need to wipe my fingers off so I don't put fingerprints all over the bag. We're going to pop this through. So you just want to carefully pop the bottom of your bag, or pouch rather, through. Now your vinyl's pretty sturdy, and it's 16 gauge vinyl, so it holds up pretty well. It's not going to rip very easily, and that's why they had us using the 16 gauge, because it's pretty tough. I use it on quite a bit of projects. I like to make snow globes and stuff on my embroidery machine, and I use this vinyl so it stays nice and sturdy. And then you just push your finger in your, excuse me, your corners, so they come out and look like a little box shape on the edge. And do the same on the other side. Just poke it out. And then I just kind of finger press it a little bit so it gets that block shape. And there we go. We've got a cute little bag. I'm just going to roll the sides up. And there we go. And so then you just take your zipper. I probably should have had my zipper in place before I put my bag around, mind you. So just get my zipper going. I might have to reverse my bag. I'm telling you, I have found every little thing. There we go. So I just had to squeeze my side here because I didn't have my zipper moved over. Before you turn your bag, it's probably a good idea to have your zipper over just a little bit. It makes it a little bit easier. And these are all the things I'm finding out as I go. And I'm just kind of getting the shape going of it. And I'm getting fingerprints all over it. I'll have to clean it up afterward. But there we go. We got a cute little bag. Zips up all nice. Let me see if I can get it on the camera a little bit better, so you can see the cute little bag. I think that's just adorable, and it will come in nice and handy. I'm going to make a few. I'd like to have some to put some of my threads in and different stuff. So yeah, I think that's pretty super cute. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you'll have a lot of fun making your pouches. And if you found this tutorial handy, please take a moment to stop and like our video. Subscribe to Seaside Quilting Supplies. And right next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell. If you click on the little bell, it gives you an option to change your notifications. If you change it to all, whenever we come out with a new tutorial, you'll get a notification that it's out. We have quite a few coming up this month, and we're already planning on our April tutorials. Alrighty, and you can find us on Facebook, so don't forget to tell you. If you go to Facebook and you search for Seaside Quilting Supplies, LLC, you will find our business page there, and we have lives every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern and every other Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. We just had this last Sunday off, so this coming Sunday we'll be having our next live, and the Thursday night one, of course. And depending on when you watch this, that will be true, but if you check on our Facebook page, there's a calendar that lets you know when all the lives are available. On Thursdays, we tend to do a combination of notions and fabric. On Sunday, it's mainly fabric. Sometimes we throw some notions in there. We have a lot of new fabrics coming in. So I hope that we'll see you there. Happy sewing!